Welcome to Redemption. We're so glad you're joining us in person or online. If this is your first time at Redemption, we want to give you a rundown of what you can expect today. In just a few minutes, our band will lead us in a few songs. You're welcome to sing along if you feel comfortable. The words will be on the screen. After that, we will hear a hope-filled message from a leader at Redemption. This message will last about 25 to 30 minutes, and finally we will end by participating in an age-old tradition called communion. We will explain more about communion after the message concludes. After communion, we're all done here. We welcome you to linger in the lobby after church and get to know some people. All in all, we will be here for about an hour. If you have any questions during the service, text us, 314-391-4141, or ask one of our volunteers. You have so many things going on in your life, so thanks again for taking the time to check out Redemption.
Hey friends, let's stand and worship together.
His grace runs deep. While I was a slave to sin, Jesus died for me. Yes, he died for me. Whom the Son sets free, oh, is free indeed. I'm a child of God. Yes, in my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me.
Well, hey everybody, welcome to Redemption. I'm so glad that you're joining us this weekend. My name is Casey Jordan. I have just a couple of announcements for you. First of all, the Connect card. When you walked in today, you should have gotten a Connect card. This is a tool that we use here at Redemption every single week. It's not just for you if it's your first time, it's for you anytime you want to get in touch with us. So if you're interested in joining one of our impact teams or being discipled, or if there's any questions that we can answer about who we are and what we do here, the Connect card is the way to get in touch with us so that we can reach back out to you and serve you however we can. And then second of all, here at Redemption, we place a really high value on giving. We're a really generous community. And that's one of the things I really love about being part of this church, is that this is such a generous church. And because of your generosity, we're able to be generous with others. So if you would like to give today, there's a handful of ways you can do that. You can go to redemptionstl.com/give and either give a one-time gift or even set up a recurring gift. You can Venmo us at redemptionstl. You can text any dollar amount to 84321, or if you would like to give through cash or a check today, we have a box sitting out on the table in the lobby, and you can just drop that on your way out. But for now, we're going to continue in worship together, so let's sing.
I count on one thing. The same God that never fails will not fail me now, will not fail me now in the waiting. The same God who's never late is working all things out. You're working all things out. Oh yes, I will lift you high in the lowest valley. Yes, I will bless your name. Oh yes, I will sing for joy when my heart is heavy all my days. Oh yes, I will. God. All right, sing this with me. I count on one thing. The same God that never fails will not fail me now. You won't fail me now in the waiting. The same God who's never late is working all things out. You're working all things out. Oh yes, I will lift you high in the lowest valley. Yes, I will bless your name. Oh yes, I will sing for joy when my heart is heavy all my days. Oh yes, I will for all my days. Oh yes, I will. I choose to praise, to glorify the name of all names that nothing can stand against. I choose to praise, to glorify the name of all names that nothing can stand against. And I choose to praise, to glorify the name of all names that nothing can stand against. And I choose to praise, to glorify the name of all names nothing can stand against. Oh yes, I will lift you high in the lowest valley. Yes, I will bless your name. Oh yes, I will sing for joy when my heart is heavy all my days. Oh yes, I will for all my days. Oh yes, I will for all my days. Oh yes, I will. God, we praise you and we lift up your name in this place today. And we just say thank you for who you are. Thank you for being a big and awesome God who surrounds us with love and who surrounds us with your mercy, Jesus. And help us to continue to point all things to you and to worship you. So when you think about the words of that song, I always think the writer of that song obviously came from a deep place with his relationship with Jesus, because it's a big thing to write words like that, but to live that and to mean that when your heart is heavy, when life isn't going the way that you think it should, yet you can still praise and glorify God. And for those of us who follow Jesus, when we've made that choice, we bring in so much to our lives. We bring in God's grace, and it's His grace that restores us. It's His grace that puts all the pieces back together when things are shattered and when things don't make sense. In John 16:33, it says, I've told you these things so that in me you may have peace. It's in this world you're going to have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. And that is the truth of God's word. We are overcomers when we put our trust in Jesus. And it does make it possible to have peace in the most strangest of circumstances. And so on this earth, there will be things that try to define us. And there will be things that we think are going to have the last and final word. But in the truth of Scripture, God has the final word, not our earthly circumstances. So let's continue to worship and thank Him for that. Oh, we thank you, God. Oh, thank you for your peace, Jesus. Oh, we're steadfast, oh God. I don't want to be afraid every time I face the waves. I don't want to be afraid. I don't want to be afraid. And I don't want to fear the storm just because I hear it roar. I don't want to fear the storm. I don't want to fear the storm. Oh, peace, be still. Say the word and I will set my feet upon the sea until I'm dancing in the deep. Oh, peace, be still. You are here, so it is well. Even when my eyes can't see, I will trust the voice that speaks. Oh, and I'm not gonna be afraid, 'cause these waves are only waves. I'm not gonna be afraid. I'm not gonna be afraid. And I'm not gonna fear the storm. You are greater than its roar. And I'm not gonna fear the storm. I'm not gonna fear it all. Peace, be still. Say the word and I will set my feet upon the sea until I'm dancing in the deep. Oh, peace, be still. You are here, so it is well. Even when my eyes can't see, I will trust the voice that speaks. Peace, peace over me. It's your peace, God. Oh, thank you, God. Let faith rise up, oh heart, believe. Let faith rise up in me. The Spirit declaration tonight. Let faith rise up, oh heart, believe. Let faith rise up in me. Oh, let faith rise up, oh heart, believe. Let faith rise up in me. Oh, let faith rise up, oh heart, believe. Let faith rise up in me. Oh, peace, be still. speaks peace, peace over me. Oh, peace, peace over me. Oh God, it's your peace that passes all understanding. Oh, it's your peace, God, that guards our heart and our mind and our soul. God, I just pray for everybody who is in this room tonight and people who are watching online, God. I just pray that you give us a sense of your peace. Let us feel your Holy Spirit, God. And maybe there's people who are struggling and having a hard time reconciling with what that even is, God. I just pray that you send resources and people into their lives, God, to minister the peace of Jesus. God, let us have faith that's strong. Let us rise up and let us just take hold of your word, God, and receive your grace. Let us receive your mercy. We love you and we thank you for all that you do for us. It's in your name we pray. Amen. You can have a seat.
Well, hey everybody, welcome to Redemption. As I said earlier, my name is Casey Jordan, and I am so excited to be with y'all today. We are in a series right now called Holy Habits, and over the last couple of weeks, we've begun talking about these spiritual habits or disciplines that God uses to transform our lives so that we can be more of who He created us to be. We talked last week about how these disciplines are the means by which we position ourselves to be changed by God. The hazard, though, with studying spiritual disciplines is that they can so easily become just another item to check off our already lengthy to-do list rather than a means by which we invest in our relationship with God. We began last week by talking about the foundational discipline of spending time with God. If you want to grow and develop in your relationship with God, you have to spend time with Him. And so we started there last week. This week, we're going to talk about a discipline that gets a lot less press, but I think we desperately need to recover and practice, and that is the discipline of rest. I began taking a weekly day of rest maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and I was at the time the director of discipleship at a church in North Carolina, so I was working full-time. I was taking 2 or 3 graduate-level classes, and I only had 1 day off a week, and that was Friday. So Friday very quickly became my study day. It was the day where I got all of my schoolwork done. So then, one week I was working on writing a class on spiritual disciplines for my role as the director of discipleship. And as I was reading and researching on spiritual disciplines, I noticed that author after author kept talking about this thing called rest and this thing called a Sabbath, which is the biblical weekly day of rest. And so as I was working on this class, I began to really feel like I needed to write about the Sabbath. And so I did. I began writing the lesson, and about halfway through writing the lesson, I realized, it occurred to me that I had no business writing about rest because I wasn't resting. Like, how in the world could I stand up in front of a classroom full of people and tell them how important this discipline was that I wasn't even practicing? And so that week, I began committing to a weekly Sabbath. I gave my Fridays, what had been my precious day to study, over to rest. I rest now on Saturdays, but we'll get to that later. So fast forward to last week. So I was at a conference this past week in Florida from Monday to Friday, and I really wanted to get this message written before I left. I do not like to leave things to the last minute. I really wanted to get it written before I left town because I knew I wasn't gonna have a whole lot of time during the week of the conference. I knew I wasn't gonna have a whole lot of time when I got back. The problem is that I spoke last weekend also. So the Friday before, I was trying to get that message wrapped up. And so in my head, I was like, oh, no big deal. I will just work on my message on Saturday. And then I remembered that Saturday is my day of rest. How could I write a message on taking a day of rest on my day of rest? Like, how could I stand before you and tell you all about the importance of rest when I had skipped my day of rest to write about rest? Right? Like, that would have been absolutely ridiculous. So I just want you to know that I did not write this message on my day of rest, and I have friends who can vouch for it because they texted me to make sure I wasn't being a hypocrite. Here's the point. The point is that rest is for many of us truly a discipline, myself included. myself included. We live in a culture that highly values a packed schedule. We wear it as a badge of honor. We're proud of it. When people ask us how we're doing, we tell them how busy we are. We want them to know just how many commitments we're able to juggle, and we want them to be impressed. Our identity is so wrapped up in what we do. And God, in his great wisdom, knew that this would be a struggle for us. So he gave us a very simple structure to follow. Here's what it says in the book of Exodus. Remember to observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. You have 6 days each week for your ordinary work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath day of rest dedicated to the Lord your God. Sabbath is a Hebrew word that literally means to stop. It literally means to stop. We have 6 days to work, but the seventh day is for stopping and resting. Now, the context here is the 10 Commandments. This is the fourth of the 10 Commandments. So clearly this matters to God. This matters to God, and it should matter to us too. The 10 Commandments are actually given in 2 places in the Bible, here in the book of Exodus, but then again in another Old Testament book called Deuteronomy. And these 2 passages give us the 2 reasons for observing Sabbath, for taking a day of rest. So we're gonna start in Exodus, we're gonna continue on in this passage. Here's what it says. Remember to observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. You have 6 days each week for your ordinary work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath day of rest dedicated to the Lord your God. On that day, no one in your household may do any work. For in 6 days, the Lord made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and everything in them. But on the seventh day, he rested. That is why the Lord blessed the Sabbath and set it apart as holy. So this is referring back to the creation account in the book of Genesis. It tells us that God created the world and everything in it in 6 days. And on the seventh day, it says that he finished his work. He stopped. He rested. Now, it's not that God was tired. God does not grow weary as we grow weary. But here's what I want you to see. Even God does not root his identity in what he does. What he does flows out of who he is. And so it is with us. Your identity is not rooted in what you do. By the way, in case you're wondering where God roots your identity, the book of Genesis actually tells us that too. Let me read it for you. Then God said, let us make human beings in our image to be like us. They will reign over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, the livestock, all the wild animals on the earth, and the small animals that scurry along the ground. So God created human beings in his image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. You are made in the image of God. You have inherent value and dignity and worth apart from what you do, but because of who you were made by and whose image you were made. So we were made to enjoy relationship with God and relationship with one another. You are not God, but you were made to image him, to represent and to reflect him, his heart and his character to the world. That's who you are. Your identity is rooted firmly in who made you, not in what you do. Yes, he has things for you to do. He certainly does. The Bible has a lot to say about living meaningful, productive lives that actually contribute. But that's not where our identity is rooted. God does give us 6 days to engage in meaningful, God-honoring work, but then he gives us a seventh day to stop, to rest, to remember that what we do flows out of who we are and not the other way around. So, the first reason for taking a Sabbath, the reason for resting is given to us right here in the book of Exodus, that God built a rhythm of work and rest into his good creation. This is how he designed the world. This is how he designed you to operate from the beginning. In the words of H.H. Farmer, if you go against the grain of the universe, you get splinters. This is the grain of the universe. This is how God ordered his good creation. So why would we not adhere to the way God designed us to work? Sabbath, then, is in part an exercise in trust. It's in part an exercise in trust. When we Sabbath, we trust what God has to say about our identity. That it's rooted in who made us, not in what we do. We trust that God knows best. That as the creator of the universe, he knows best how creation is supposed to operate. We trust that while we stop, the world will keep turning because he is God and we are not. It's an exercise in trust. It's a submitting to how God designed his creation. So we were made to adhere to this pattern of work and rest. And let me just say it this way. We cannot possibly hope to become all that God created us to be if we're ignoring the way God created us to be. And this is how God structured his world and structured us. The second reason that God commands us to Sabbath is found in the book of Deuteronomy, the retelling of the 10 Commandments. And here's what it says. Observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy, as the Lord your God commanded you. You have 6 days each week for your ordinary work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath day of rest to the Lord your God. On that day, no one in your household may do any work. All right, sounds familiar up to this point, right? Here's the second reason. Remember that you were once slaves in Egypt, but the Lord your God brought you out with his strong hand and powerful arm. That is why the Lord your God has commanded you to rest on the Sabbath. You were once slaves in Egypt, but God brought you out. Now, if you're not familiar with the story of the Israelites' slavery in Egypt, let me just summarize the entire book of Exodus for you. At the end of the book of Genesis, the nation of Israel is really nothing more than a large family, about 70 people. But through a series of interesting events, they end up making their way from Canaan, which is modern-day Israel, down to Egypt. Now, between the book of Genesis and the book of Exodus is about 400 years. So over the course of those 400 years, the nation of Israel grows. They're no longer a large family. They're now a large nation, and they're growing so rapidly that the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, is getting worried. He's beginning to grow concerned that if they get too big, they're going to overthrow him from power. And so he enslaves them. He enslaves them. And for 400 years, they are in slavery to this oppressive ruler, a series of oppressive rulers, rather. They cry out to God for rescue, and God answers in the most incredible way. He calls a man named Moses. Moses is an Israelite, but he's not living in Egypt. He's not one of the slaves. He's living in a land called Midian. And God comes to Moses. He says, I want you to go back to Egypt, and I want you to tell Pharaoh to let my people go. And so Moses does. Moses goes back to Egypt, and he approaches Pharaoh. He says, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says, let my people go. Now, Pharaoh, unsurprisingly, refuses. That doesn't sound like a good idea to him. This is his free labor force. So he says, no. So God sends a plague upon the Egyptians. Moses goes back to Pharaoh again, says, hey, God says, let my people go. He gives Pharaoh a chance to make a different choice. Once again, Pharaoh says, no, thank you. Thanks for the offer, but no thanks. I'm going to keep my slavery intact. And so God sends another devastating plague upon the Egyptians. 10 plagues later, Pharaoh finally relents. Pharaoh finally relents, and through Moses, God leads Israel out of their slavery and into freedom. So that's the context for this commandment. When Israel was enslaved, they had no rest. Slaves don't get a day of rest. But God has set them free. And free people get to rest. And so that's the second reason that God gives for observing the Sabbath. You were once slaves, but I want you to take a day every single week to remember that you're no longer a slave, that you have been set free. Listen to how Paul in the book of Romans puts it. We know that our old sinful selves were crucified with Christ so that sin might lose its power in our lives. We are no longer slaves to sin. You and I were once slaves. The Exodus story is our story. We were once slaves to a tyrant king, to an oppressive ruler. We were slaves to sin. We were in bondage to it. But by the power of the cross, God has let us out of our slavery. We're free. We have been rescued and redeemed. And because we are free, we get to rest. So not only is rest built into the order of God's creation, but rest is a declaration of our freedom. These are the two reasons that God gives this. So I want you to hear this. Sabbath, a day of rest, is for all people. It's for all people, whether you're a Christian or not. This is for you. Because it was built into the order of creation. And because your value and worth and dignity is bound up in who made you, not in what you do. So whether you're a Christian or not, Sabbath is for you. But if you are a follower of Jesus, Sabbath takes on a new meaning, a deeper meaning, a declaration of freedom. It's worth celebrating. It's worth enjoying. It's worth resting because slaves don't rest, but free people rest. So let me push this just a little bit further. I just want to make sure we expand this and understand it fully. We rest because we are free, but we are free because of the grace of God. So when we rest, when we remember our freedom, we are doing so as a response of joy and gratitude for the grace that God has given us. So the Sabbath then should be a day filled with wonder and delight. It should be the best day of our week. Listen to how John Mark Comer said it. The Hebrew word Shabbat, or Sabbath, means to stop, but it can also be translated to delight. It has this dual idea of stopping and also of joying in God and our lives in his world. So the Sabbath is about stopping and delighting in the goodness of God. It's about resting and enjoying his world and our freedom. Who wouldn't want to practice Sabbathing? I mean, really, like of all the commands in the Bible, this is a really good one, isn't it? Like who wouldn't want this? Who wouldn't want this? But this is really difficult for us. It's really difficult. And so I'm just gonna take a guess at what you might be thinking right now. This all sounds wonderful, but it's utterly unrealistic. It's utterly unrealistic. How am I supposed to take an entire day of rest when I feel like I'm barely getting everything done as is? I am so glad you asked. Let me give you just a couple of practical ways to begin Sabbathing. First of all, start small. Start small. I'm a big fan of incremental progress. I really am. So here's the thing. Yes, a biblical Sabbath is an entire day of rest. But if you're not making any time right now to rest intentionally, then 2 hours is a significant improvement, right? So start with 2 hours. Start there. Take 2 hours every single week until it's simply a part of your rhythm, until you're consistent. Then bump it up. Bump it up to an entire morning or to an entire afternoon. And then keep it that until it's a part of your rhythm, until you're consistent. And then once that's established, take the plunge and rest for an entire day. For an entire day. We talked last week when it comes to spending time with God, we talked about aiming for progress over perfection. The same applies here to the Sabbath. Aim for progress, not perfection. Second, practice saying no. Practice saying no. If you are going to say yes to taking a weekly Sabbath, you are going to have to say no to a lot of other things. You're certainly gonna have to say no to anything that interferes with your Sabbath, but the reality is you're also gonna have to say no to things the other 6 days so that you can have a Sabbath. You're gonna have to get good at saying no. Now, I understand that saying no is difficult for a lot of us. Saying no is particularly difficult when it comes to good things. But good, as Stephen Covey once said, is often the enemy of the great. Good is often the enemy of the great. Good things can keep us from great things or best things. And so practice saying no. By the way, if you find saying no really difficult, I have 2 alternatives for you. First of all, I'm not available that time, or I'm not available this week, or simply, that's just not gonna work for me. You don't have to give any further explanation than that. You don't. I'm not available, or that's just not gonna work for me. But get good at saying no. Here's the thing about Sabbath. Sabbath is not a suggestion. Sabbath is a commandment. It's one of the 10 commandments. So what will you eliminate from your life so that you can honor this commandment? What will you do to become all that God created you to be? This is what we're after, right? This is what we're after in the series, to become more of who God created us to be. And you were not meant to live in a state of constant hurry. You just weren't. You were not created to live perpetually worn out and tired. So what will you say no to so that you can honor the way that God created you to operate and therefore position yourself to be changed by him, to become all that he created you and intended you to be? All right, number 3, decide when you're going to Sabbath. Decide when you're going to Sabbath. Now, depending on your church background, you might have a really strong opinion about this, okay? Because there are some Christian denominations that say that Sabbath can only be taken on Saturday. Saturday is the right day because Saturday is the 7th day. And if you go back and look at the 10 Commandments, it says to rest on the 7th day. There are other Christian denominations who say that no, Sunday is the right day because that is the day Jesus was raised from the dead. So if we're going to celebrate our freedom, what better day to celebrate than the day Jesus was raised from the dead and set us free? Both of those make logical sense, right? Here's the thing. When I first started taking a Sabbath, Saturday and Sunday were not an option for me. I worked at a church that had services on both Saturdays and Sundays. Now, I loved my work. I loved my job, but I was still working. And so I took Fridays. Friday was the day that I could take, and so I took Fridays. Now I work on Fridays, and I take Saturdays. It's changed with the season of my life, but what has not changed is my commitment to Sabbath. So find a day that works for you. Decide when you're going to take your Sabbath. And by the way, once you decide when you're going to take your Sabbath, whether you're starting at 2 hours or you're taking an entire day, that will have implications for the rest of your week as well. I spend every Sunday evening planning and preparing for my week ahead. This is kind of my Sunday evening ritual post-church. I go home, I eat dinner, and while I'm eating dinner, I begin planning out my week. I look at every event or meeting that I have scheduled for the upcoming week. I look at my to-do list. Here's all the tasks that I need to get done, and then I prioritize that list. And so I try to get the most important tasks done earlier in the week and leave the less important tasks for later in the week. So that way, if I don't get to them, it's okay. I can go into my Sabbath knowing that I got done what I most needed to do, and the other things can wait for later. So this is part of my rhythm. What I want you to see, though, is that I build my week around Sabbath. I know what day I'm taking it, and I plan the other 6 days accordingly to make sure that by the time I get to Saturday, by the time I get to my Sabbath, I can take it, just free from any anxiety and worry over what I have to get done. Now, I'm not saying that I never have any anxiety. I'm not saying I never have any worry. I'm not saying I never feel like there isn't more to be done. I do, and often, actually. But when I structure my week like this, it allows me to enter into a Sabbath and actually really rest and really leave behind that to-do list until the next day. So that's what I do. I don't know what you do. I don't know what rhythm would work best for you, but maybe that will help. You need to find a rhythm that works for you. You need to find a rhythm that works for you. So decide when you're going to take your Sabbath and plan accordingly. Now, you might have a spouse or children to consider. I do not. But have this conversation with your spouse or with your kids. Work on it together as a family. Try to find a time when you can rest together. And if you're having a really hard time aligning your schedules, let me refer you back to steps 1 and 2. Start small, that's okay, and practice saying no together as a family, as a unit. All right, number 4, decide how to spend your Sabbath. Decide how to spend your Sabbath. Now, I want to be really clear here. A Sabbath is not the same thing as a day off. A day off is the day where you catch up on all the errands you didn't get done throughout the week. It's where you do household chores or pay your bills. That's what your day off is for. A Sabbath is not a day off. It's a day to stop and delight. If you leave with nothing else, I want you to remember those 2 words, stop and delight. That's what the word Sabbath means. It's a day to stop and delight, to rest and enjoy his world and your freedom. He has given all of this to you by his grace, and it's a day to enjoy it. It's a God-oriented day. And so it should be nothing less than a day of worship. Listen to what John Mark Comer said about worship. Often people hear worship and they assume that means singing Bethel songs all day while reading the Bible and practicing intercessory prayer. That's all great stuff. But I mean worship in the wide, holistic sense of the word. Expand your list of spiritual disciplines to include eating a burrito on the patio, or drinking a bottle of wine with your friends over a long, lazy dinner, or walking on the beach with your lover or best friend. Anything to index your heart towards grateful recognition of God's reality and goodness. Anything to index your heart towards grateful recognition of God's reality and goodness. By way of example, let me just tell you what a typical Sabbath looks like for me. I always start by sleeping in. I do not set an alarm on my Sabbath. I wake up whenever my body is ready to wake up, and usually that comes out to around 9 o'clock. Then I get up, I make my coffee, and I sit down and I spend time with God. That's the beginning of my Sabbath. I start by spending time with him. Then when I'm done spending time with God, I'll turn to whatever book I've been reading and enjoy a couple of chapters. I might pick up my guitar or sit down at my piano and play and sing by myself just for the sheer joy of it. Oftentimes, my afternoons are for relationship. I spend them either with family or with friends. So that might look like getting coffee with a buddy. It might look like playing Legos with my nieces and nephews. It might look like enjoying dinner with my family. But most of my afternoon and into the evening tends to be relational. I spend it with time with people that I love. And then when I get home in the evening, I might pick my book back up and do a little bit more reading. I take my time in the evenings, on Sabbath evenings, getting ready for bed. I just let it take as long as it takes. And I usually try to get to bed a little bit on the earlier side, so that way when I wake up the next morning, I'm rested not only physically, or not only emotionally, mentally, and spiritually, but physically as well. I want to be as holistic of a day of rest as it can possibly be. So that's just an example. I have friends who spend their Sabbath day hiking. I have friends who do jigsaw puzzles. I have friends who love to cook, and they spend their Sabbath day cooking or painting. Decide how you're going to spend your Sabbath. It probably won't look like mine, but decide how you're going to spend your Sabbath. I'm not suggesting, by the way, that you should schedule it out in like half-hour increments. That kind of defeats like the stop and delight, aspect of Sabbath. But have a sense as to what you're going to do. What are life-giving, refreshing, renewing activities that you can add to your Sabbath? Sabbath is not a day to just sit around. It's not a day of idleness. It's a day of purposeful, restful activity. So what's restful for you? What can you do to index your heart towards grateful recognition of God's reality and goodness? The key is this: prioritize that which brings you joy. Again, tell me this doesn't sound amazing. Like, who doesn't want this day every single day of the week? This is what God has called us to. It's incredible. It's incredible. All right, let me give you just one more thing before we wrap up. Let the Sabbath set the tone for the rest of your week. Let the Sabbath set the tone for the rest of your week. I already talked a little bit about planning your other days around the Sabbath, but I don't want you to leave feeling like your Sabbath day is divorced from your days of work. They're not. They are related to one another. They're one rhythm that God has given us. Walter Brueggemann says this. He says, people who keep Sabbath live all 7 days differently. People who keep Sabbath live all 7 days differently. The spiritual disciplines, remember, are the means by which we position ourselves to be transformed by God into the kinds of men and women He created us to be, and the Sabbath is no exception. So what I want you to hear is that the Sabbath is really not so much about taking a day of rest, although it is that. It's about becoming a more restful person. It's about cultivating a more restful spirit. It should make you less hurried the rest of the week, not more hurried. The Sabbath should set the tone for the rest of your week. John Ortberg writes this: hurry is not just a disordered schedule. Hurry is a disordered heart. Sabbath reorients our hearts. It reminds us that we were not created to do it all, that we are finite beings with limited capacity. The solution is not to pick up our pace, but to set better priorities, to say no, to decide what's going in and what needs to come out. But the solution is not to pick up the pace. I've recently begun ending my Sabbath by reflecting on the previous week and praying about the week to come. Now, to be clear, I'm not doing the work of planning and preparing for my next week. That happens on Sunday evenings for me. But I reflect and I pray. So as I reflect, I ask myself, did I spend this week overwhelmed and tired? Was I overcommitted? Where could I have said no? Where was my heart disoriented? Did I lack love and grace for other people? Was I impatient at interruptions? And as I pray, I ask God to make clear what's most important in my coming week. God, what do you want me to prioritize? My list is a mile long, but God, what are the things that you want me to do this week? How do you want me to prioritize? I ask him to help me prioritize. I ask him to teach me how to live with margin. I ask him to send me the right interruptions. The right interruptions. Now, I know in our culture, interruptions are typically, they have a negative connotation, but here's what I found. I have found that oftentimes the interruptions that come up during my week are God-given opportunities to develop my character, for example, patience, or to love the people that he's entrusted me to love. Oftentimes, I couldn't have possibly planned for the opportunities that God sends by way of interruptions. But here's the thing. If I'm living at the edge of my capacity, then I can't take those interruptions. I can't take those opportunities that God has given me to develop my character, to grow, to represent and reflect him better. I can't take those opportunities to love someone who's in crisis or hurting or just needs to talk or just wants to spend time together. I can't do that if I'm living at the edge of my capacity. And so living with margin, living with space is one way in which practicing Sabbath, keeping Sabbath, flows into the other days of the week. Brueggemann was right. People who keep Sabbath live all 7 days differently. So I hope that as you begin to keep Sabbath, I hope you do. I hope you begin taking a day of rest. But I hope it filters in to the other days of the week. I hope you don't just legalistically take a day of rest, but I hope you become a more restful person. I hope you cultivate a more restful spirit. The Sabbath, again, is not a suggestion. It's a commandment. But what a good commandment. What a good God to insist that we stop and delight, that we stop to rest and enjoy. What a good God. What a good God to command this of us. Rest is without a doubt a discipline for most, if not all of us. But I'll tell you personally that other than spending time with God, this is the discipline that God has used to most change and transform me. It is. It has been the most transformative discipline in my life. God has used Sabbath to help me understand and internalize that my identity is not rooted in what I do. God has used Sabbath to help teach me the difference between good things and best things. God has used the Sabbath to teach me, to help me become more present with others by slowing down, not just my schedule, but my heart. God has used the Sabbath to make me more patient and loving. He's used the Sabbath to deepen my gratitude for the freedom that I enjoy in him. I don't have it all figured out. I'm still learning how to do Sabbath better. I don't always rest the way that I'm called to rest. I wish I could tell you that I had it figured out. I don't. But I can tell you that if you will give this a chance, if you will take God at his word, if you will trust him in this, he can and will use this discipline to absolutely transform your life, to transform your relationships. Imagine for just a second, what would it be like to live an unhurried life? Not just one day of the week, but every day of the week. Imagine what that would be like. Imagine what it would be like to have an entire day every single week to just stop and delight, to rest and to enjoy the goodness of God, to celebrate what he has done and to savor all that he has given. What would that be like? Imagine how it would feel to have your inner chaos replaced by an inner peace. Imagine how this discipline might change your relationships. Imagine how it might change your family, how it might change your friendships. Imagine how it would change this community if we all did this. If we all dedicate ourselves to a weekly day of rest. Imagine how much more present we would be with one another. Imagine how more patient, imagine how more gracious, imagine how much more loving we would be if we took God at his word and rested. Who wouldn't want what God offers through the Sabbath? I know I want it, and I bet you do too. The Sabbath is built into the rhythm of the world. And so it is for all people, at all times, in all places. But for those of us that follow Jesus, there is a depth to Sabbath. There's a deeper appreciation, a deeper gratitude, because we know that not only are we honoring the way that God created us, but we are celebrating that he has redeemed us, that he has rescued us, that he has brought us out of our slavery. And he did that on the cross. So here at Redemption, every week, we celebrate this ancient practice called communion, or the Lord's Supper. If you didn't get a communion kit when you came in, raise your hand. Marcus will get one to you. The night before Jesus was crucified, he celebrated the Passover with his disciples. The Passover commemorated when God rescued Israel out of Egypt, when he set them free from their slavery. And it really was a celebration. It really was a celebration. And that night, Jesus sat with his disciples, remembering God's rescue. And he effectively said, I'm gonna do it again. I'm gonna set you free from your slavery, from your bondage to sin. And I'm gonna do it by dying for you. So as you take the bread, and as it breaks between your teeth, I want you to remember that I was broken for you. I want you to remember that I endured the crown of thorns. I endured the nails in my wrists and in my ankles. I endured the spear in my side. I was broken for you so that you could be set free. And then he took the cup and he held it up and he said, this is my blood poured out for you. Every time you take it, I want you to remember that I poured out my blood for you. I bled out for you so that you could be free. Jesus has rescued us from our slavery. He has set us free. And he's invited us to remember, to stop and delight, to rest and enjoy that freedom every single week. I hope that you will rest this week and then for every week after that. Redemption, a church that lingers, lasts. I'm so glad you were here tonight. I hope you will linger for a little bit. I hope you will be unhurried as you go. We'll see you next week.